Lord of the Mysteries Audiobook, Part 118.
Chapter 1171, the third one. Let a piece of history that has been left behind return to the present era. Return, not reappear. The meaning of the two are completely different. It's not sufficient for me to write the true history of the fourth or third epoch and disseminate it to complete the ritual. Klein's right hand, which was holding the fountain pen, paused. He instinctively analyzed the contents of the miracle invoker potion. After some thought, he found something that perfectly matched the ritual's requirements. That was to let the people of the City of Silver escape the forsaken land of the gods and return to the northern and southern continents, allowing this history that had been left behind for 2,000 to 3,000 years return to the present era. This isn't any easier than escaping Amon's pursuit. The only way to leave the forsaken land of the gods is to enter the giant king's court and open the palace where Dark Angel Sassurer is in deep slumber. This is the ancient sun god's negative personality. It's ranked first among the kings of angels and is known as the left hand of God, the deputy of heaven. He might even be stronger than the current Amon. Besides, his current state is being watched by the various deities. Yes, the more controllable aspect of this compared to my escape from Amon is that I can make sufficient preparations. Klein slowly exhaled and felt that there was a certain chance of completing the ritual. In fact, he knew very well that, even without him, the City of Silver would make repeated attempts to open the door to the giant king's residence and find a way to leave this forsaken land. It was as if they were moths darting towards the flames, even at the cost of death. No matter what, with my participation, the chances of success will definitely be higher than what it is now. Klein subconsciously wanted to open the door to the Dark Angel's slumber ground to attract Amon, creating chaos to offset the damage caused by the Dark Angel's awakening. This was a tactic he was rather familiar with. However, he eventually rejected this idea because it was too dangerous. After spending some time with Amon and finally seeing the level of a king of angels, Klein instinctively began to fear these terrifying existences. He no longer wanted to use the conflict between them to create chaos. Just their existence alone could cause irreparable damage to the surrounding Beyonders and the entire region. Under such circumstances, trying to rely on them to create a chaotic situation was no longer tottering on the edge of the abyss. If one wasn't careful, they would fall into the abyss and into eternal damnation. Therefore, it was best not to try. Unless he had no other solution, to the point of escaping being just his wishful thinking, Klein didn't want to make such an attempt. Indeed, a portion of a miracle invoker's beyonder powers comes from history, which is why there's a ritual requirement like this. How did the other scholars of your complete it? Looking at the parchment on the long bronze table, he thought of a possible solution from another angle. If it were me, the only solution I can think of is to isolate some people or history from reality. Only when they are forgotten will I allow them to return to the present era. This might take centuries, or even longer. What an evil act. Heh, it reminds me of the peach blossom spring. Those people living in utopia away from the outside world share some characteristics. After some thought, Klein believed that the difficulty of this ritual for scholars of yore was whether they could survive until the ritual was held. Furthermore, there were too many accidents that could interrupt self-isolation like that. The forsaken land of the gods has perfectly resolved these issues, but it also brings with it greater problems. Dark Angel Sassurer. What is the condition of this heaven's deputy right hand now? Is it related to the resurrection of the ancient sun god? The level involved in such a matter has already reached the ceiling of this world. Why am I always involved in such matters? Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh. He could roughly guess that this was due to the destiny Saphira Castle brought him. After all, blasphemer Amon was unwilling to shoulder such a destiny. Retracting his wandering thoughts, he focused his attention back onto the miracle invoker potion formula. The Worm of Star is from the apprentice pathway? The supplementary ingredients contain 3 high-grade spiritual materials of the 3 neighboring pathways. I've already made the Worms of Time into Fate Siphon charms. There's no way to restore them. Let Leonard's grandpa lend me another one? How can that be called lending? I'm going to use the upgraded version of a yesterday once more charm to exchange for it. Where should I find the Worm of Star? There aren't many demigods from the apprentice pathway that live in the real world. The Aurora Order's Saint of Secrets, Bodhi's. However, I'm stuck in the forsaken land of the gods and can't deal with him. All I can do is ask Ma'am Hermit and Queen Mystic for help. At the same time, I have to urge Miss Magician to become a traveler as soon as possible. Yes, I can also get her to ask her teacher where Worms of Cosmos might be. There's actually only one main ingredient. It's either the heart of the dark demonic wolf or the Beyonder characteristic produced by other miracle invokers. It's no longer 2 as 1. Yes, that also means that, at this level, there are very few scattered characteristics. They've all gathered. The dark demonic wolf is also known as the god of wishes. That's a standard angel, a subsidiary god. If I can't find any materials that can be used, wouldn't I be slaying a god? The level of an angel can already be considered a hidden existence. There's a fundamental difference from being a sequence 3. Just thinking about it makes me scared. After making a list of helpers that he could rope in, he felt a lot more at ease. He had a feeling that he no longer feared his debts when they reached a significant amount. He lifted his right hand that was holding the fountain pen, and he continued to record what he had previously learned. Most of this was something he already knew, and he could only use it as a reminder. Finally, he wrote down incomplete information in the corner of the parchment. Sequence 1, Attendant of Mysteries main ingredients, 1 Attendant of Mysteries Beyonder characteristic. This piece of information meant that Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics were difficult to obtain through other means, with only 3 to choose from. One of them is on the half-full on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range. It's with the uniqueness. The other is with Zeratul. There's still one more. According to what Leonard said, the true creator has clues to its location. Where could it be? Yes, Little Sun and the rest had hunted shapeshifters in the northern city ruins, Noise. There seems to be a high-level existence of the seer pathway lurking there. I wonder if it corresponds to Miracle Invoker or Attendant of Mysteries. Klein gradually had a thought, and he planned on visiting Noise for a preliminary investigation after he resurrected and escaped Amon. After digesting the knowledge he had gained, he summoned his golden pocket watch from the junk pile and opened it to check the time. Before he destroyed the Blood Emperor's ruin, he had sacrificed many things that he didn't need in battle, above the gray fog to prevent any damage. Despite that, he still lost quite a bit after the battle and his eventual suicide. Furthermore, they were all extremely valuable. Just the thought of it made him almost lose control. Grozel's Travels, Death Knell, Creeping Hunger, Fate Siphon Charm, Flaring Sun Charms, Marionette Konas and his equipment, Marionette Anuni and his 2 rings, and the Adventurer's Harmonica. No, I can't think about it anymore. Thankfully, I had thrown Azek's copper whistle above the gray fog ahead of time. Thankfully, I can still summon the historical void projections of these items. They're just accompanying me in a different form. Probably not for Grozel's Travels. Klein's temples throbbed as he couldn't help but feel heavy. He sighed and seriously mourned over the items, especially the mystical item that had accompanied him for a long time, Creeping Hunger. After a long silence, Klein forced his attention back to the present. As he waited for the tarot gathering to begin, he casually thought about the ancient sun god and the other matters such as Chernobyl. Suddenly, he frowned slightly. Since this is my hometown, there have never been transmigrators. They're all ancient humans that were released by Saphira Castle. Then, do places like the Chaos Sea also have similar existences? Was Chernobyl converted into a sanctuary? According to what Amon said, and what I saw in my divination, the ancient sun god had indeed woken up in Chernobyl. Then, is he a transmigrator released from Saphira Castle, or a survivor of a sanctuary? If it's the latter, who's the third person inside the cocoon? Upon thinking of this, Klein was alarmed as his pupils dilated slightly. He already had a certain guess about the history of the elves. It likely had nothing to do with Saphira Castle. This way, he still couldn't find the correct corresponding identity of the third, or more correctly, the first transmigrator. This transmigrator didn't seem to leave behind any traces in history. Without any hesitation, Klein's consciousness sank into the grayish-white fog. With the power of Saphira Castle, he came directly to a certain part of history that was relatively distant. It was made up of many fragments of light, and the clearest one was the suspended Zhou Mingrui above the door of light. And beside Zhou Mingrui, the corresponding fog of history was instantly lit up due to his sufficient knowledge of Roselle. He saw a young man who also had his eyes tightly shut in the cocoon. There was no need to verify it. Through that sense of familiarity and spiritual intuition, he confirmed that this was the former incarnation of Emperor Roselle Gustav, Huang Tao. Without bothering to appreciate the emperor's true appearance, Klein turned his gaze to the other side. There was a transparent cocoon there, and the figure inside could vaguely be seen. As he had already seen the other hanged figures, he had lit up many fragments of light in the fog of history. They interweaved and stimulated each other, barely allowing him to see the fuzzy area. The figure inside was obviously a woman. Female. A thought came to his mind as he realized that he had missed the direction when he analyzed the transmigrator. Transmigrators had an objective mindset. They could completely control themselves and not leave any traces that exceeded the times, but there was one thing that couldn't be avoided. It was very obvious that Saphira Castle was related to the three pathways related to the seer, apprentice, and marauder. After the birth of a transmigrator, they had to quickly make a connection with one of these three pathways. Not only was Klein involved in the case brought about by the Antigonus family's notebook, but he also quickly had the opportunity to choose the seer potion. In Intis, where Roselle was active, there was the secret order, and he got to know Zeratul early on. According to this logic, the ancient sun god with the marauder authority was indeed one of the reasonable suspects. Klein immediately conjured a pen and paper and began listing the corresponding names he knew at the moment. For example, fourth epoch people from the Antigonus, Zeratul, and Abraham family, or the kings of angels surrounding the ancient sun god. Before long, Klein's gaze stopped on a few names. The first person was none other than the ancient god, Phlegria, who clearly had the authority of seer. Behind him was his subsidiary god. The god of the dead, Salinger, and the goddess of misfortune, Ammonizes. The latter was also known as the Evernight goddess. Chapter 1172, Unperturbed. Klein stared at the parchment in front of him for a long time without moving. After a while, he gently tapped the edge of the long model table, causing all the items that he conjured to disappear. He summoned his golden pocket watch and opened it to take a look. He sent a message to Little Sun, informing him to prepare to participate in the tarot gathering. About 1,000 heartbeats later, dark red beams of light rose from the two sides of the long bronze table, condensing into different figures on different high-back chairs. Without any gaps in time, all the members of the tarot club looked at the figure sitting at the very end, who was shrouded in gray fog. Seeing that Mr. Fool wasn't wearing a monocle, Leonard inwardly heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he turned around and looked at the bottom of the long, modeled table to confirm the situation of the world Klein Moretti. Similar to him, Catalia, Audrey, and Force instinctively turned their attention to the world Gehrman Sparrow after seeing Mr. Fool. One of them knew that the world was in a dangerous situation and could only seek Mr. Fool's blessings. Another had failed to receive any feedback for 2 days, and she suspected that Gehrman Sparrow had really been embroiled in the matter regarding George III, with something definitely having happened during that time. The final one knew that George III's matter was extremely risky, and was a little worried that Mr. World would suffer serious injuries. Seeing that the world Gehrman Sparrow was perfectly fine without any abnormalities, Audrey retracted her gaze, curtsied, and bowed towards the end of the long bronze table. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." With the world situation becoming even more chaotic, she felt a little comforted by the fact that the Tarot Club could still maintain its original state. This significantly improved her mood. After the Tarot Club members bowed under Miss Justice's lead, the Fool Klein nodded slightly, indicating for everyone to sit down. Then, he slowly surveyed the area and smiled. It seems all of you are very concerned whether today's tarot gathering would proceed as usual. Upon hearing this, Alger's heartbeat sped up as he heard thumping sounds. Without a doubt, he believed that Mr. Fool was referring to him, and was giving him a gentle punishment. In other words, he had given him a chance to repent. Alger lowered his head and said with a trembling voice, "We weren't pious enough and thought too much." Why is Mr. Hangman apologizing on my behalf? Force, who had instructed Shio to ask Mr. Fool if the tarot gathering would proceed as scheduled, was stunned for a moment before she gave up on thinking. She then turned to the end of the long bronze table and lowered her head. She repeated, "We weren't pious enough and thought too much. So I wasn't the only one who prayed to Mr. Fool over the past few days. Mr. Hangman claims to have overthought things because there was a possibility that the tarot gathering would be cancelled, causing him to have some unnecessary speculations. But Force shouldn't have thought of that." Audrey looked across the table and then to her sides, feeling enlightened. The Fool nodded and looked around again. Such concern is considered normal. He laughed and sighed. "I've recently used the world's body to play a game with Amon in the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Thankfully, we didn't have to skip this tarot gathering. Everything he said was the truth, but what the others would decipher from this information was definitely far from the actual situation. And this way, even if the news of the World Gehrman Sparrow being equal to the Fool was released, the members of the Tarot Club would only sneer in their hearts that Amon was trying his deceitful tricks again. To have a period of time that the world was equal to the Fool didn't necessarily mean that the world was always equal to the Fool. A portion of the truth was also a lie. Played a game with Amon. Old man's guess was right. Mr. Fool was deliberately using Klein to bait blasphemer Amon. From the looks of it, he had obtained a rather satisfactory outcome, allowing Amon to suffer a terrible loss. Leonard, who had long come up with speculations, felt that this was completely in line with his expectations and didn't doubt Mr. Fool's words at all. Mr. Fool didn't reply for 15 minutes because he was in a critical moment battling Amon. He has already recovered to such a state. Audrey was pleasantly surprised and shocked when she heard that. For some reason, she felt a strong sense of honor. Alger could also tell from Mr. Fool's words that he had taken another step towards his recovery. He was actually able to hold the upper hand against the King of Angels. This made him even more frustrated at himself for having doubts and testing the Fool. Mr. Fool had hinted in advance that the tarot gathering might be cancelled because he had long predicted that there would be a conflict between him and Amon. In fact, it's even possible that he had taken the initiative to create this episode by setting up a trap for Amon. Alger instantly made many connections and felt that there was no way he could hide his thoughts in front of such a high-level existence. He warned himself once again, "I can't do such things again." So Mr. World didn't provide any feedback because his body was being used by Mr. Fool to resist Amon. That King of Angels, Amon, is truly powerful. Mr. Fool actually needed to personally take action. Force and Shio exchanged looks, not having any more doubts about their previous questions. Catalia roughly understood the reason why the world had disappeared. She also guessed that the messenger who had the contractual ties with the world likely wasn't able to enter the Forsaken Land of the Gods. At the same time, she was surprised by the appearance of a King of Angels appearing on stage in the present times. She felt that this was one of the signs of the apocalypse. Emlyn wasn't aware of what happened recently. He merely looked at everyone with a somewhat blank look. For some baffling reason, he felt that he had been locked behind Channy's gate for far more than a week or two. Perhaps it had been a month or two, to the point that he felt like he no longer had a grasp over the current situation. Mr. World has come to the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Did Mr. Fool use his body to engage in a battle with that terrifying Amon? Derek was first alarmed before he felt a strong sense of joy. This meant that the City of Silver's next exploration would receive tremendous help. He immediately looked towards the end of the long bronze table, and he blurted out, "Honorable Mr. Fool, the chief wishes to receive your blessings for a ritual. Are you agreeable to such a request?" Having long learned of this from his prayers, Klein nodded slightly and said, "Sure." After receiving his promise, Derek couldn't help but smile. For a moment, he didn't know how to express his gratitude. 2 seconds later, he lowered his head and said loudly, "My faith lies only with Mr. Fool." The fool nodded and turned to look at Ma'am Hermit. He warmly said, "What questions do you have this time?" "Ah, the Queen didn't say anything in her letter." Catalina was taken aback as she decided to first ask something she wanted to know. After all, she could still ask several questions. She deliberated for 2 seconds before saying, "Honorable Mr. Fool, what's the truth behind George III's death?" The moment the hermit said that, Justice Audrey and company immediately focused their attention. This was exactly what they wanted to know. Amongst them, the star Leonard had a certain level of understanding over the matter. He was more concerned about the deeper reason behind this incident. And among the members of the Tarot Club, the only one who was more confused about the situation was Emlyn. His mind was filled with thoughts like, what, and what happened? He hadn't even read the newspapers recently, so he didn't know that King George III had been assassinated. As for the son, although he wasn't sure why George III died for no reason, he didn't care at all. The fool Klein smiled and said calmly, "George III wanted to become the Black Emperor. And for this reason, he dug up the Tudor ruins, engaged in human trafficking, and created the Great Smog of Backlund. He initiated a war, allowing the Fasak airships to bombard Backlund. Unfortunately, he failed at the final ritual, and the secret mausoleum he needed for the ritual was destroyed." He briefly described the entire incident in the calmest tone he could make, doing so without mentioning what he had done. It would be beneath Mr. Fool to explain the situation on his own accord. The Great Smog of Backlund. The airship raid. This was all done by George III to become a god. Audrey's eyes widened as she instantly recalled the two things she had experienced before. Suddenly, she understood why the world Gehrman Sparrow wanted to stop George III from becoming a god. She knew that he was a gentle and kind gentleman, and he would definitely not allow the culprit behind these two tragic cases to go scot-free. If it were me, I would also have thought of doing so, but I would hesitate and be stopped by the possibility of ill developments. As for Mr. World, he is firm and decisive. This is a matter that involves the deities. Yes, there should also be the will of Mr. Fool in this matter. Audrey glanced at the world Gehrman Sparrow, who was sitting silently at the other end of the long, model table. She nodded slightly to express her agreement. Black Emperor. George III wished to become a god? This. Yes, Mr. Fool has the Black Emperor card of blasphemy. Gehrman Sparrow was previously investigating the matter of the Great Smog and human trafficking. Indeed, all of these are connected together. There was actually such a secret hidden behind it. From the looks of it, Mr. Fool's goal has been achieved. His plan has succeeded. Therefore, he has taken one more step towards his recovery. He can now face off with the King of Angels head-on. The more Alger thought about it, the more fearful and spirited he became. He felt that, despite knowing of some clues ahead of time, he was completely unaware of Mr. Fool's setup. Amidst the shock experienced by Leonard, Fors, and the other members of the Tarot Club, Catalina, who already had a premonition, suppressed her emotions and decided to ask another question. Honorable Mr. Fool, what's the attitude of the 7 deities regarding this matter? Chapter 1173, Advice. Good question. The fool Klein inwardly praised her, and he explained by using the Red Angel Evil Spirit's explanation in his own words. The 7 deities wish to have a Black Emperor, but they are not unanimous in their candidate for the Black Emperor. When George III successfully obtained the ticket to becoming one through secret preparations, the 7 deities had no choice but to accept it, regardless of whether they approved of him or not. So that's the situation. Apart from the moon Emlyn and the sun Derek, the other members of the Tarot Club were enlightened. They roughly understood why the churches acted in a rather contradictory manner when faced with the tragedies of the Great Smog of Backlund, the deaths caused by the Faysation air raid, and George III's assassination. Following that, they suddenly had a question. Since George III had already made preparations and had reached the final step of carrying out the ritual while obtaining the tacit approval of the 7 deities, why would he fail? They immediately thought of an answer, because Mr. Fool didn't agree to it. In the destruction of George III's Black Emperor ritual, the churches probably didn't do anything to stop it. Perhaps, they even provided some help to Mr. Fool's subordinates. Did the Church of the Lord of Storms make use of this chaos to secretly do something? No, they likely wouldn't conceal it too much. Leonard recalled all the details he had previously discovered, and he was confident of his grasp over the overall situation. The seven deities' tacit approval. Mr. Fool vetoed it and sent the world and other blessed to secretly destroy George III's apotheosis ritual. But what has this got to do with the Queen? Why did she discover that Gehrman Sparrow has gone missing? Black Emperor. The Queen might have participated in the operation led by Mr. Fool, and later, discovered that a participant had gone missing. Catalia made a guess at the truth through her rich knowledge and insight. And at this moment, Emlyn had just managed to make heads and tails of the discussions that had just been discussed, and he managed to understand the developments outside during his time in protective custody. George III had secretly plotted to become a god and received the seven deities' tacit approval. In the end, Mr. Fool's blessed destroyed his ritual, causing him to die on the spot. Seeing that everyone was silent, the Fool Klein looked at the hermit Catalia and said, "Any other questions?" "There's nothing else this time." Catalia bowed her head even lower. She was more respectful than before towards the mighty figure at the end of the long bronze table. Although she had long known that Mr. Fool had the Snake of Fate, Death Console, and Ancient Bane under him, and was in secret control of the life school of thought, she still never expected that the powers Mr. Fool could mobilize in the real world were able to destroy a king's apotheosis ritual. Furthermore, he had foiled the plot of a king of angels, the son of the Creator. Mr. Fool's hidden forces are more exaggerated than I imagined. What effect do the members of the Tarot Club exert on him? A backing faction? Individual growth? Or is it just a backup plan? Catalia instantly thought of many things and momentarily forgot that she was already a Sequence 4 demigod. No matter which organization she was in, she was considered a member of the upper echelons. Just the feats displayed by Mr. Fool is enough to make a saint lack confidence. Justice Audrey only took a glance at Ma'am Hermit before she interpreted her mental state. At this moment, the Fool Klein nodded. "You may begin." Upon hearing this, Leonard immediately turned to the other end of the long, mottled table and said to the world, "How's your situation now?" Force, Shio, Audrey, and the other members of the Tarot Club also cast their gazes over, expressing their concern for the world Gehrman Sparrow's situation. From their point of view, Mr. World, who was stuck between Mr. Fool and Angel of Time Amon as a combat tool, was probably in a bad situation. His survival meant that he was already considered lucky enough. Feeling the varied concern, Klein controlled the world and chuckled hoarsely. "Not too bad, but not too good either. It's all thanks to Mr. Fool's grace that I've finally obtained a secret from Amon, but I haven't completely escaped from his grasp without waiting for everyone to respond," he continued. "I'm currently in a rather sticky situation. I relied on Mr. Fool's powers to enter a certain concealed state and temporarily extricate myself from Amon's grasp. However, if I were to dispel this state and return to the real world, I'll only find myself back where my body is. And it's very likely that Amon is still loitering nearby. I would like to make an attempt at finding a solution. I wonder what your opinions are regarding this matter." The meaning behind the world Gehrman Sparrow's words was very clear. He wanted to rely on himself first, leaving Mr. Fool's help as a last resort. And his actual meaning was essentially the same: find a way to bypass the restrictions first. And in the case that his solution didn't really work, then he would consider living in the state of being undead. Solution? Alger and company were suddenly a little excited because the suggestions they provided would be used to fight against the King of Angels. If they were employed and were of use, then this would be a proud moment in their life, one that would remain for the rest of their lives. Audrey was just about to speak in excitement when she retracted her words. This was because she knew that she couldn't give random suggestions, otherwise, it could lead to Mr. World getting caught by Amon. Shio thought about it seriously and realized that she couldn't come up with any useful suggestions. She could only choose to observe and learn. Must it be where your body originally was? Do you have any blood or hair that was kept elsewhere? Alger thought for a moment and gave a suggestion using a question. The fool Klein thought for a moment and made the world shake his head. No. Compared to his original body, a single tube of blood was too little. Thinking of this, Klein suddenly had an idea. Perhaps he could use those 2 tubes of blood as ingredients, combining them with other methods, using alchemical life to create a new body. There are 2 problems. Firstly, alchemical life requires the spirit body's involvement, otherwise, the final product might not be considered my body. Secondly, I don't know any demigods who can complete alchemical life. The only one barely related to them is Frank Lee. Will I end up becoming a mushroom man? Then, I'd be better off as an undead. As Klein thought about it, he nearly shivered. After the hangman's suggestion was rejected, the hermit Catalia set off from her knowledge of mysticism. She deliberated and asked, "Do you have a Sequence 3 sealed artifact?" "Why do you ask?" the world asked. A Sequence 3 sealed artifact can respond to prayers within a certain range. You can make use of that, Catalia explained simply. Klein roughly understood what Ma'am Hermit was thinking. You're talking about descent? That's right. Get someone to set up a descent ritual at the periphery, and you should be able to respond to it in your own concealed state. Catalia first glanced at the sun and described the specific plan. Then, she realized something as she asked, "Do you really have a Sequence 3 sealed artifact?" She originally wanted the world to seek Mr. Fool's bestowment. "I'm already a Sequence 3 beyonder," Klein replied simply as he controlled the world. The members of the Tarot Club were momentarily speechless. They knew very well that Mr. World must have advanced to Sequence 4 at the end of June to become a demigod. And now, it was December of the same year. The Queen once said that using the blood of the Snake of Fate to advance would make it easier for me to become a Sequence 3 clairvoyant than others. Besides, the Tarot Club has given me plenty of precious mysticism knowledge. It has greatly helped me digest the potion. But even so, I still need another half a year before I have a chance of attempting to reach Sequence 3. The hermit Catalia subconsciously looked around and discovered that the other members wore stupefied and envious looks. She sighed silently and said, "Is my suggestion useful, Mr. World?" The World Gehrman Sparrow shook his head. There is a huge restriction when responding in that state. Once he chose to descend, it would mean that he would begin the rest of his life, no, afterlife, as an undead. Perhaps, I can combine the 2 methods. Yes, I can use the method of praying to the Fool, sea god, or protector of magic and drama performers to leave the forsaken land of the gods, but that's not urgent. It's too easy to reveal the truth. The Fool Klein made the world look at the star Leonard while in thought. Leonard instantly understood what he meant. He tersely acknowledged. "I'll go back and do some research to see if there are any other ideas." Clearly, his true intention was to ask Old Man when he was back. He was an angel who knew Amon rather well. Perhaps, he could come up with suggestions that no one else could think of. This was the answer that Klein wanted. He immediately made the world say, "Okay." After the discussion of how to escape his predicament came to an end, the World Gehrman Sparrow looked at Force. "Help me ask the Abraham family if they still have any worms of cosmos that have yet to lose their spirituality. If there are, what will be the price for the exchange?" A worm of star was a high-level spiritual material. Most of the time, it didn't contain any beyonder characteristics. Therefore, their spirituality would suffer an irreversible loss. Without any special methods, it would be difficult to preserve it for too long. Worms of cosmos. Force was taken aback before she nodded. "All right." After receiving an answer, Klein made the world cast his gaze at the hermit Catalia. "If Miss Magician isn't able to exchange for a worm of star from the Abraham family, I would like to entrust you with a mission." "What mission?" Catalia asked with interest. The world said with a smile, "Hunt the Aurora Order's Saint of Secrets, Bodhi's." Chapter 1174, Joint Operation. The Aurora orders Saint of Secrets, Bodhi's. Mr. World wants to hunt him? Force's first reaction was that she had heard wrongly. After all, Gearman Sparrow had no connection to the Saint of Secrets. However, she quickly had a rough idea from the Worm of Star that had just been mentioned. This made her suddenly excited and thrilled. This was because she also wanted to hunt the Saint of Secrets, Bodhi's, to avenge her teacher's family. However, due to her lacking strength and the inability to pay for it, she had kept this thought to herself. Although it sounds like Mr. World doesn't plan on personally taking action, Ma'am Hermit is also a Sequence 4 demigod, and she has the support of that Queen Mystic behind her. I can provide the utmost support within my abilities. As her thoughts raced, Force cast her gaze at the hermit beside her, waiting for her reply. After some thought, Catalia said, Bodhi's is very likely a saint of the apprentice pathway. It's very difficult to hunt him. Besides, he has the Rose Redemption backing him and the True Creator's protection. With my current level, it's almost impossible for me to complete this mission solely on my own. You can seek the help of Queen Mystic. I will also arrange for other partners for you. Klein made the World Gearman Sparrow reply in a low and hoarse voice. The reward is the right to choose the spoils of war first, and mysticism knowledge that will allow you to digest the potion within this year. It's December. Catalia's heart palpitated when she heard that. She deliberated and said, when the time comes, I will try, but I cannot guarantee success. No matter how difficult the mission of hunting the Saint of Secrets was, it couldn't be as dangerous as accepting the knowledge injection process from the hidden sage. And as for the mysticism knowledge provided by the latter, they didn't necessarily aid in digestion. There was a high probability that it included mathematics, machinery, and literature. No problem. As long as you do it seriously, I'll still compensate you with the mysticism knowledge even if you fail in the end. The World nodded and confirmed the deal. At this moment, Force finally couldn't help but speak out, Mr. World, Ma'am Hermit, can I join this mission? I might be able to provide some help. Even if you didn't, I would have gotten you to. The fool Klein secretly laughed and made the World nod gently. There's a spot reserved for you in this mission. Force wasn't surprised at all. She asked curiously, what can I do? What do you need me to do? Gearman Sparrow replied in an extremely calm tone, bait. Force opened her mouth, momentarily at a loss for words. She had a feeling that she knew that this would happen. The World Gearman Sparrow continued, similarly, you also have the right to choose the spoils of war. You'll be just after Ma'am Hermit. Also, during this period of time, I can help you record beyond her powers like traveling. Force had never expected a reward, as it was her greatest reward to be able to exact revenge successfully. In the future, she might even receive additional rewards from her teacher. Without any hesitation, she nodded and said, okay. The World immediately cast his gaze towards Miss Justice. How's the digestion of your Dreamwalker potion? Thanks to the expedition into Grozel's travels and the persistence she had put into her acting, the speed at which she digested the potion was very fast. Her eyes darted around as she thought for a moment. I've already concluded the acting principles. In another 2 to 3 months, I should be able to completely digest it. It's a little slow. Klein mumbled inwardly as he made the World say, create more opportunities to act. If you can digest the potion before Ma'am Hermit attacks the Saint of Secrets, I can give you Vin Rambises beyond her characteristic ahead of time as payment so that you can join in on the operation. Klein believed that he would have to stay in the Forsaken Land of the Gods for a very long time. Most of the matters in the outside world could only be interfered with through the members of the Tarot Club. It was also beneficial for him to increase their strength as soon as possible. Furthermore, he wasn't directly giving it to her. The difficulty of hunting the Saint of Secrets Bodhi's was just as Catalia had said. It was rather difficult. All right. Audrey was just fretting over how she could accumulate more credit with Mr. World. Therefore, she naturally agreed without any hesitation when she heard his offer. In her heart, the members of the Aurora Order were lunatics and destructive maniacs. there was no need to find a reason to deal with them. In addition, Audrey had previously been troubled by her lack of experience as a Beyonder. This gave her a chance. Although it was rather dangerous, it was still an opportunity. Gehrman Sparrow sure is generous. To provide the knowledge that can help a mysticologist digest the potion and a sequence 4 demigod characteristic. This shouldn't only be for the Worm of Star. It sounds like a supplementary material. He's helping the members of the Tarot Club improve as quickly as possible according to Mr. Fool's will, so as to be effective in the future. Alger listened to the world's conversation with the other members and vaguely grasped a certain truth. This made him rather vexed. He suspected that if he hadn't lacked faith and had other thoughts, to the point of foolishly testing Mr. Fool, he might have already been assigned a mission that could aid him in pushing open the door of godhood. At that moment, Justice, who had agreed to the request, glanced at the magician and said with a faint smile, "I'm looking forward to the Abraham family not having any Worm of Star." "Me too." Force nodded seriously, indicating that she had the same thoughts. Seeing that the world was done speaking, Catalia thought for a moment and said to Judgment, "Do you want to join this mission? Do some intelligence gathering on the periphery. Your ability in this area left a deep impression on me." Even without Ma'am Hermit's invitation, Shia wouldn't refuse in helping her friend. She nodded gently and said, "I don't have a problem if the operation is in Backlund. If it's somewhere else, my role would be greatly discounted." A sheriff and their own area of jurisdiction were always connected. The more familiar they were with the place, the better they could showcase their abilities. Once they exceeded that range, they could only rely on their Beyonder powers. "Your reward is being third to choose the spoils of war." Catalia looked at the star once again. "If there's a need, I hope you can allow the official factions to appear at the right moment." Leonard chuckled. "I hope you don't have to go that far. My reward shall also be a spoil of war. If my dear poet friend here wasn't invited in the end, then the mission of hunting the Saint of Secrets would have nearly become a sorority for the female members of the Tarot Club." The fool Klein muttered inwardly as he made the world Gehrman Sparrow finalize the matter. All that was left was to wait for the Abraham family's feedback. Following that, Alger and Derek reached a rental arrangement for the unshadowed crucifix. Just as they entered the free exchange segment, Emlyn couldn't help but look towards the end of the long bronze table. "Honorable Mr. Fool, can you give me a hint? How should I escape protective custody?" The fool, who was shrouded in the gray fog, nodded slightly and said simply, "This week." His answer was said with great confidence, but it wasn't a prophecy, but a judgment of the situation. The current situation had Fasak and Intis attacking Lowen, while Fainapotter was attacking Lowen's allies, Lenberg, Mason, etc. The three churches definitely didn't wish to suffer any damage the Sanguine could bring while already having existing enemies. Therefore, Emlyn would be released very soon, but it was hard to say for Father Utravsky. Similarly, the Sanguine's focus would definitely be shifted to the global situation. It was unlikely for them to have the motivation to continue probing Emlyn and his other partners. In addition, in the past 2 days, the one whose reason for praying was the most forced, apart from Shio, was Emlyn White. Klein suspected that he had been locked in the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral all this time because it was convenient for the goddess to exert her influence on him. Now that the matter had ended, he was no longer of any use. Combined with the three factors, it wasn't difficult to conclude that Emlyn would be free in no time. The only exception was that if this fellow had really been forgotten. Be it the Church of Evernight or the Sanguine, they had forgotten that there was such a fellow locked behind Channy's gate. If that was the case, Klein would get the Star Leonard to provide him with some assistance. Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief and sincerely thanked Mr. Fool. At the end of the free exchange, the world Gehrman Sparrow suddenly looked at the hanged man. "You said that you've already arrived on Sonia Island and are inside the primitive forest?" "Yes," Alger replied in puzzlement. Gehrman Sparrow pondered for a moment. "You can try to seek out an elven ruin. Perhaps you might chance upon some sort of opportunity." Alger suddenly thought of the Book of Calamity and the scenes he had seen in his dream. He nodded thoughtfully and said, "All right. After another round of exchanges, the tarot gathering came to an end. Audrey and company stood up and bowed before leaving the world above the gray fog. After returning to his body, Leonard immediately lowered his voice and described Klein's predicament. Finally, he said, "Old man, do you have any good suggestions?" "My suggestion? I think it's better to ask the fool for help," Pallas Zoroast replied without any hesitation. Leonard coughed lightly and said, "Aren't you going to use this opportunity to make things difficult for Amon?" Chapter 1175, Ideas are very important. Making things difficult for Amon? Pallas Zoroast chuckled. What benefits can there be? Otherwise, forget it. Leonard was momentarily at a loss for words. After a few seconds, he said, "At least it can make you feel good." Pallas chuckled. "I will feel better if you don't bring this topic up." Without waiting for Leonard to respond, this sequence one angel from the Marauder pathway sighed with his slightly aged voice. "Doesn't your former colleague have a deceit charm? Perhaps he can use this to come up with a solution." After getting rid of the Amon avatars in background, Pallas had given the godhood symbols and magic labels needed to make 4 charms: deceit, parasite, deprivation, and aging, to Leonard. Leonard had passed on this knowledge to Klein, and the latter had used the knowledge and the worms of time to create 1 deceit, parasite, and deprivation bullet each. Later on, he had used them to deal with Kona's Kilgore, but Leonard wasn't aware of this. Leonard whispered thoughtfully, "Old man, are you saying that by using the deceit charm, you can mislead Amon and cause him to misidentify the location, preventing him from influencing Klein's escape?" In his mind, Pallas Zoroast snapped back, "Do you think it's possible to use a deceit charm in front of a Marauder Pathway's King of Angels? It's impossible." Leonard laughed dryly and pressed in a thick-skinned manner, "What do you mean then?" Pallas Zoroast's voice suddenly sounded more spirited. "Deceive the rule that one can only return to where one's body is." "Deceive the rule? That works too?" Leonard asked in shock. Pallas gave a self-deprecating laugh and sighed. "Compared to deceiving Amon, deceiving a rule is much easier. After all, underneath this world is madness and chaos." This sentence made Leonard speechless for a moment. On the one hand, he wasn't experienced enough. He didn't know that orders and laws could be deceived, and on the other hand, he never expected that, in Old Man's heart, Amon was even more terrifying than the laws of nature and the order of the world. After nearly 10 seconds, he spoke again. "With this method, how high is the possibility of success?" "It's very, very low," Pallas said with a sneer. "However, the probability of deceiving the order of the world like this with a deceit charm made from a worm of time from Amon's avatar is very, very low. Therefore, my suggestion is still to get him to make a request to the fool for help. Don't waste any more time. When fighting Amon, the longer the delay, the more dangerous it will be." Leonard pondered for a moment before nodding in agreement. "I understand. I'll also advise him to do so." Of course, he wouldn't forget mentioning the highly improbable method that Old Man had suggested. "It's good that you understand." Seriously, disturbing an old man's reading. As Pallas mumbled, his voice gradually lowered and disappeared from Leonard's mind. In 7, Pinster Street, the newspaper that was placed on the coffee table suddenly flew up and automatically spread open over the sofa. "Using a deceit charm to deceive the requirement that I can only resurrect where my original body is?" Above the gray fog, in the ancient palace, Klein reconstructed Pallas Zoroast's suggestion in his own words. As soon as he finished speaking, he recalled the animal hide lantern that kept burning. Amon had deceived the laws of nature, allowing the candle to remain in a magical state and continue burning for a week without needing any fuel. His eyes lit up as he whispered, "This line of thought is something only an angel from the Marauder pathway can think of immediately. It might not be impossible." Like Pallas, he did feel that, compared to dealing with Amon, it was much easier to deal with the laws of nature. After seeing hope, he immediately analyzed the possible outcome. "Although I've already used the deceit bullet, I can summon it from the historical void. After all, before the effects end, I'll definitely reform my body and successfully resurrect." the laws of nature are truly pitiful. Not only will they be deceived, even the item used to deceive it is fake. The only problem is that the bullet might not be able to deceive the mysticism law. It was already a little difficult to deal with Kona's Kilgore back then. Amidst his thoughts, he slowly surveyed the area and gradually gained inspiration. That was to use Saphira Castle. After gaining initial control of Saphira Castle, he could already mobilize the power of a sequence 2 angel here. And many of the things he had come into contact with previously had explained that the authority of Saphira Castle had a high probability of spanning over the 3 pathways of Seer, Apprentice, and Marauder. It could generate a convergence effect on the corresponding Beyonders, and it had clearly attracted the attention of Amon. That was to say, Klein suspected that Saphira Castle had the power of these 3 pathways at the same time. However, as a seer, most of the power he could stir was concentrated in this domain. With the help of the medium known as the Deceit Bullet, I might be able to stir the other powers of Saphira Castle. Since I'm already capable of using some miracles in the seer domain, having power from the Marauder pathway at the angel level is a highly reasonable deduction. The only problem is that there must be a medium of a sufficient level. This way, I don't have to worry about not being able to deceive that rule. As his thoughts brightened up, he seriously began to formulate a plan. He used the mysticism laws as his target and attempted to formulate a scam. In order to reduce the difficulty, it's best to have additional preparations. I can't deceive something out of nothing, at least unless I'm Amon's true body. Yes. I'll bestow a tube of my blood to Little Son. I'll create a fake respawn point that exceeds the range. And then, using the Deceit Bullet as a trigger, stir the corresponding angel-level powers contained within Saphira Castle, misdirecting that role and making it view the fake respawn point as the real one, while the real one becomes the fake one. He outlined the details bit by bit, and when his thoughts finally took form, Klein immediately used the mysticism connection between himself and the spot he died, to observe the actual situation with his true vision. He saw that the grayish-yellow fog had thinned a lot, and the deep ravine that hid Chernobyl was no different from before. It was unknown where Amon, who was wearing a pointed hat and a monocle, had stolen a rock from and had placed it on the spot where Klein had passed away. He sat on it and patiently played with a human skin glove. He occasionally bent the human skin glove's finger and stretched it at other times, as if he could pass 100 years doing that. About a kilometer away, in a certain spot in the grayish-yellow fog, 3 Amons in black classical mage robes crouched around a rock as they seriously played poker cards that they had stolen from somewhere. From time to time, they would nudge their monocle. Elsewhere in this extensive moor, Amon would be either alone or in groups, strolling leisurely, writing in thought, or discussing all sorts of questions with one another. In the dark and dangerous forsaken land of the gods, it was such a harmonious scene. It would have been better if the young men weren't all the same, wearing classic black robes, pointed hats and monocles, with similar black hair, black eyes, broad foreheads, and thin faces. Just as Klein was about to make a further observation, the Amon sitting on the rock suddenly raised his head. He nudged his crystal-carved monocle and looked at him. Across the moor, all of the Amons looked up at the highest point of the fog of history. Klein immediately retracted his gaze and cut off the connection. In the City of Silver, Derek Berg arrived at the top of the spire and met Chief Colin Iliad. "Your Excellency, I've already received the promise of blessings," Derek said frankly and directly. With white hair and an old scar on his face, Colin Iliad was visibly relieved. He slowly nodded and said, "That's good. That's good." He had repeated the sentence in a rare instance. As an excellent demon hunter and the City of Silver's chief, he had always been patient, never taking unnecessary risks. Therefore, with the sudden lack of a response from the fool, he didn't immediately turn to the true creator, and he decided to wait patiently for another month. For the City of Silver, which had been waiting in the Dark Ages for more than 2,000 years, a month was something that could be accepted. Without waiting for Derek to reply, Demon Hunter Colin left the window and calmly said, "Head back first. I'm going to start preparing for the advancement ritual." Derek glanced at the chief and said sincerely, "You'll definitely succeed." He didn't stay any longer. He immediately left the spire and returned home. After setting up the ritual again and placing the 6 powerful corpses that he had hunted to the correct position, Klein Moretti began to concoct the potion. After all of this was done, the City of Silver chief closed his eyes and lowered his head, chanting in Jotun, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck." Above the gray fog, Klein saw ripples of light emanate as he heard a slightly illusory prayer. He immediately summoned a paper figurine and combined the power of Saphira Castle with it. He threw it into the prayer circle and conveniently marked the City of Silver's chief. At the same time, with the help of this prayer circle, he observed the situation of the entire spire and the City of Silver. He confirmed that there was no sign of Amon's parasitic existence near the chief or little son. "I have to seize this opportunity." Klein immediately conjured the world Gehrman Sparrow and made him pose as he prayed. At this moment, Klein Moretti saw the light. In the holy light, a holy angel with 12 pairs of illusory wings suddenly descended. As clean, white feathers fluttered down, the demon hunter was embraced by these wings of light. This was a blessing from Mr. Fool. Chapter 1176, Plot. In the face of the angel's embrace, Klein Moretti wasn't astonished. He accepted everything with a calm expression, as though he was already prepared. The ritual began. He took a step forward, picked up the Silver Night potion, and poured it into his mouth. Without a sound, this demon hunter's body swelled up, turning into a grayish-blue giant with bluish-black veins covering him. He stood several meters tall, with black cracks on his forehead. Every inch of this giant contained the indescribable power of mystery and terror. Apart from his head, which still retained the appearance of a human, the rest of his body was akin to a mythical creature that exerted a strange mental influence. In the next second, the skull underlying Klein Moretti's head seemed to soften as it sank inwards. With the black crack as its core, his head slowly squirmed, as though it was forming a nebulous vortex. Such pain made the City of Silver's chief, who had killed many powerful creatures, unable to restrain himself. He let out a series of howling cries that could make the minds of ordinary creatures split apart. If it wasn't for the fact that Klein Moretti had already evacuated the members of the spire in advance, leaving behind only the demigod-level Waite Chermont to watch over him and prevent any accidents from happening, many Beyonders would have definitely lost control. The remains of the 6 powerful living creatures that were situated in different spots floated up under the invisible power of the ritual, circling the mutated Klein Moretti, using some sort of mysterious connection to awaken some of the memories of this peerless demon hunter. It was the experience of hunting demons. It was him painfully ending the former chief's attack with his own hands. It was his life of defeating powerful monsters again and again. These manifestations appeared like painting on an altar. Sometimes, they would be integrated into Klein Moretti, and sometimes they would be extracted from him, helping him define himself. He maintained a certain level of clarity during the extreme pain and changes. Only at this moment did Klein Moretti finally understand the essence of the ritual. As a Sequence 4 demon hunter, the hunting of every powerful creature was a battle of intense mental catharsis. It left a deep impression in his life. With these powerful mental imprints, he was able to locate himself after consuming the potion, and not be lost in pain and madness. This made Klein Moretti recall a term recorded in some of the books in the City of Silver, anchor. At Sequence 3, he was considered a deity in a certain sense. He could respond to prayers within a certain range, so an anchor was required. As this wasn't the level of an angel, an anchor didn't necessarily need to be a believer. It could be replaced by other things, such as the clear marks in one's life that had meaning in mysticism. In the memories that had been awakened, Klein Moretti slowly regained his self-awareness. He felt his body again and grasped its changes. Right on the heels of that, a layer of wings formed from illusory light extended out from behind him. They fused with the surrounding paintings as they constantly shrank inwards. The surface of Klein Moretti's body collapsed into a silver armor that was firm and beautiful, but it didn't possess any weight to it. After the demon hunter advanced to a silver knight, due to the difference in the deity's blessing, there would be minute differences between Silver Knights. Previously, the leader of the King Court's chasers, Light Color Murskogen, had received blessings from the Giant King. Therefore, the various aspects of the Silver Knight domain were much stronger. On the other hand, Colin Iliad could occasionally make his body condense a silver rapier that could teleport. While in combat, it would appear at random during an attack, with beneficial tendencies, bringing about unpredictable changes. In addition, he could also obtain a certain uniqueness when using mercury liquefaction. As the silver armor finally took form, Colin Iliad had completed his advancement. Apart from not having a single vertical eye on his head, he was equivalent to a mythical creature. At this moment, he raised his right hand and waved it to the side. At a small hill outside the city of Silver, a silver beam erupted out of thin air. It tore apart everything around it, splitting the small hill into two halves. During Colin Iliad's advancement to Silver Knight, Derek Bird completed the bestowment ritual and obtained a small metal tube. Seizing the opportunity of the City of Silver's chief creating abnormalities and drawing away most of the attention, Klein suddenly reached out while in the ancient palace above the gray fog. He had summoned a bullet and death knell from the historical void. Right on the heels of that, he did a divination in advance, confirming that there weren't any signs of Amon's parasites around the little sun. Without any hesitation, he opened the revolver's cylinder and stuffed the deceit bullet into it. Pa! With a shake of his right hand, he closed the cylinder and used the mysticism connection to aim at the spot where he had died. Bang! He calmly pulled the trigger and fired the only bullet. At the same time, taking advantage of this beyonder effect, he willed Saphira Castle's powers into mobilizing. The gray fog boiled once again, including the space around them. A majestic but slightly dark energy surged out like a tidal wave, wrapping around the bullet, passing through the gap and shooting towards the real world. The light in Saphira Castle suddenly dimmed. Suppressing his fear and horror, Klein used Death Knell's historical projection to simulate the feeling of a sudden descent. He leaped towards the crimson star representing the sun and leaped towards the tiny tube of his blood. On the barren moors of Chernobyl, all of the Amons wearing pointed hats raised their heads and looked at the lightning that streaked across the sky. They looked at a deep and quiet swath that even the lightning couldn't illuminate. The Amons nudged their monocles, and after a moment of silence, they laughed. He doesn't seem like someone who can come up with such a solution. Palace? He joined this organization codenamed the Tarot Club? In the Berg household in the City of Silver. The darkness in front of Derek suddenly turned dark, as if the candles in the room had been burned to ashes. To the residents of the City of Silver, this wasn't a good thing. Derek's eyes immediately lit up with the light of the sun. At that moment, bits of light burst out from the deep darkness like transparent squirming worms. The metal tube that Derek had received shattered automatically as fresh red blood floated out from it and suspended itself in midair. It didn't spread apart but instead merged with the fragments of light. In just 2 or 3 seconds, these light fragments condensed into one, forming a huge ball of light. The spherical light ball stretched out and changed, quickly forming a figure. The figure had a deep outline and a cold expression. He wore a silk half-top hat and a black coat while holding a black iron-black revolver. It was none other than Gehrman Sparrow. Having successfully deceived the laws of mysticism, Klein used the help of his old blood to complete his resurrection. Without needing any introduction, Derek had already recognized the visitor through his special temperament. After being stunned for a moment, he instinctively revealed an uncontrollable smile. Mr. World? Klein raised his head slightly and looked at Little Sun, who seemed to have grown taller. He subconsciously reached out and pressed down on his top hat. He then nodded gently and said, "I will be in the forsaken land of the gods during this period of time. However, I have to leave now. I can't lure Amon into the City of Silver. If there's a chance in the future, I will cooperate with you." Having understood what Mr. World meant, Derek nodded heavily and said, "All right." Just as Klein raised his right hand and was about to snap his fingers to leave with flaming jump, Derek looked at him and suddenly pointed to the storage cabinet in the room. "Mr. World, do you need to bring some food with you?" There are mushrooms that can produce milk. Klein controlled himself, not letting the corners of his mouth twitch. He maintained his cold attitude and said, "I don't drink milk." As soon as he finished speaking, he snapped his fingers, causing a scarlet flame to fly out of his pocket, wrapping around him like water. The fire quickly dissipated like falling stars, and Klein's figure disappeared from Derek Berg's room. Outside the City of Silver, in a deformed forest, flames flashed continuously, extending all the way to the moors leading to the north. After he truly left the City of Silver did Klein slow down his footsteps and summon a lantern from the historical void. He had long expected that the revival process would go so smoothly. After all, once he found the correct solution, there was no way that Amon could stop him. In the City of Silver, Amon only had a few avatars at the Sequence 4 or 3 level, so Klein could use his true vision to locate them and eliminate them ahead of time. And if they could form an avatar at the Sequence 2 level, Klein, who had gained initial control of Saphira Castle, could stir powers at the power of an angel, allowing him to easily fight such an avatar while being above the gray fog, and would stay undefeatable since he couldn't be attacked. He had the confidence to defeat his opponent. If Amon moved his true body to the City of Silver, then Klein could choose to revive at his original spot. Of course, Amon could create an avatar that was almost at Sequence 1 and send him to the City of Silver. However, under the premise of the conservation of Beyonder characteristics, how many avatars could he create? Not more than 2. As for Klein, he could split his remaining blood into multiple portions. He could use the bestowment ritual to send them to Mr. Hanged Man, to Ma'am Hermit, and to the Star Leonard. There were too many spots where he could revive, so there was no way that Amon could guard all of them. This was an above-board plan based on his own level, Beyonder powers, and the special ability of Saphira Castle. Before he attempted to revive himself, Klein was already quite certain of the outcome. The only thing he was worried about was that deceit would be detected by Amon ahead of time, allowing him to interfere in a timely manner, causing his respawn location to change. Fortunately, his divination had confirmed that the level of danger wasn't high. This was one of the reasons why he dared to try. Phew, I've really escaped from Amon. As he advanced amidst the dim yellow light, Klein felt the presence of his body, and he heaved a sigh of relief. Of course, he knew very well that he was going to encounter the relentless pursuit of Amon's main body and various avatars. Chapter 1177, Substitute. On the desolate moors filled with deep ravines, Amon stood in different spots. They opened their mouths and chanted in Jotun, the blessed of the spirit world and Saphira Castle. The mystery stemming from ancient times, the witness of an extended history, protector of Backlund magic and drama performers, the great Gehrman Sparrow. These voices were layered as they bored into the void, as though they extended to an infinite distance. 10 seconds later, all of them adjusted their crystal monocles in different manners and chuckled softly. He changed it really quickly. If Gehrman Sparrow was still automatically responding to this honorific name, they could then use this opportunity to determine the other party's location and create an error to appear directly beside their target. In the darkness that was illuminated by lightning from time to time, the hatted and coated Klein proceeded north at a moderate pace while holding a lantern. There's a prayer. Amon is using Gehrman Sparrow's honorific name. This means that a number of Amons aren't too far from me. But the City of Silver doesn't have his parasites. They're in the surrounding patrol teams, or in some unexpected creatures. As he walked, Klein suddenly turned his head and listened carefully for a few seconds. Regarding this matter, he was rather glad that he was cautious enough. He had changed the honorific name that allowed default acknowledgement while above the gray fog. It went from the protector of Backlund magic and drama performers to protector of all poor children in Backlund. This came from the Lowen Charity Bursary Foundation he had set up. Yes. Amon is a cryptologist. It's very likely that he can interpret this honorific name from all the information regarding Dwayne Dantes. No, I don't even need an automatic response. As Klein looked at the faint yellow light emitted by the lantern, he quickly made a decision. He made every worm of spirit only capable of listening to prayers, without having the ability to autonomously respond unless they had been given permission from the main body. This way, frequent prayers would severely affect his daily life, but it wasn't a big problem. This was because, other than Amon's vile harassment, no one else would pray to Gehrman Sparrow since he hadn't spread the word about his honorific name. After settling this matter, Klein thought of all of Amon's terrifying aspects. He suddenly had some doubts about what to do next. His original plan was to stay far away from the City of Silver and head to the Noise Ruins in the north to investigate the situation there. He wanted to see if he could obtain the main ingredients needed for the Miracle Invoker potion. However, after connecting that ancient city ruins with Amon, a problem was revealed. Klein could already confirm that the upper levels of neighboring pathways also followed the law of beyond or characteristic convergence. Since Amon had been wandering around the forsaken land of the gods for more than 1,000 years and had come near the City of Silver, how could he not be attracted to the Noise Ruins in the north? For the chief of the City of Silver to not dare to enter, it means the power in Noise City has definitely reached the level of an angel. Amon wouldn't ignore it. He probably doesn't dare to directly eat such a high-level beyond or characteristic of a neighboring pathway, but that doesn't prevent him from setting up a trap. Even if he hadn't done so in the past, he would definitely be rushing over there now. Of course, I can't exclude the possibility that Amon has yet to discover it because, during the City of Silver Chief's first visit, the Noise Ruins weren't as dangerous. Perhaps that power at the angel level came to the Noise Ruins later. He has been constantly migrating his believers to avoid Amon. Amidst his thoughts, Klein felt a little afraid about heading northwest for the ancient city. He decided to first see if there were any other ways to obtain the main ingredient of the Miracle Invoker potion before considering if he should head to the periphery of the Noise Ruins to observe and gather some intel. With this in mind, he walked towards the wreckage of a tall tower in his black coat and half-top hat, guided by the occasional lightning. Along the way, in the dangerous darkness outside the dim yellow light, monsters lined up and silently followed him. They were already his marionettes. Compared to them, the Saints of the Seer pathway were even more bizarre and terrifying. As they walked, one of the monsters that looked like a fish with limbs suddenly chanted in Jotun, "The sun that is eternal, you are an inextinguishable light, you are the embodiment of order." The moment it finished reciting the three-line honorific name, the monster collapsed to the ground and lost its life. The honorific name of deities often wasn't limited to 3 lines, but when chanting, one could choose any 3. For example, the Eternal Blazing Sun's complete honorific name was Eternal Blazing Sun, Inextinguishable Light, Embodiment of Order, God of Contracts, Guardian of Businesses. And just now, Klein had used the first 3. With this method, he prayed to the Lord of Storms, the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, and the Evernight Goddess, hoping to receive a certain response. However, there was no change in his surroundings 15 minutes later. It's useless to pray to a sequence 0 true deity in the forsaken land of the gods. Unless the target is the true creator, or is an existence that wields things like Saphira Castle or the Chaos Sea. That's not right. In Afternoon Town, that clergyman had the goddess's true name concealed when saying it. When he mentioned the 4th king of angels, he suffered immolation due to the involvement of deities. Perhaps it's because there's still all kinds of divine power in the forsaken land of the gods, not only concealment and degeneration. And the true names of the different deities each have special meaning in mysticism, allowing it to stir the corresponding powers. This way, it would explain why the City of Silver has been teaching the 2 true names of Badheil and Haraburgen, but they didn't end up establishing any connection with the God of Combat or the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. The prayers in the forsaken land of the gods are not heard by the true deities, or even if they can hear them, they are unable to respond. This also means that there are no remnant powers of the God of Combat or the God of Knowledge, otherwise, there would have been certain anomalies. Yes, it's also possible that it's not because there are no anomalies, but that the 2 grade 0 sealed artifacts, God-level sealed artifacts, in the City of Silver have eliminated them. In that case, if I were to directly chant the true name of the goddess, would I cause the surrounding darkness and concealment to stir? If this kind of power can be controlled, I'll have an additional effective trump card when being tracked by Amon. The probability isn't very high. Directly chanting the true name of a deity is an act of blasphemy, and it will result in the corresponding backlash, just like Afternoon Town's clergyman. Based on his logic and the phenomenon he had seen, Klein came up with a theory on the present situation. He was eager to try reading out all the true names of the deities he knew, one by one, and checking their effects. Finally, he restrained himself and didn't blindly make the attempts. I'd better go above the gray fog to do a divination first. Otherwise, who knows if there will be an unbearable accident. Divination involving deities might not give a clear revelation. After muttering inwardly for a while, Klein scoffed at his impulsiveness. My previous plan was akin to, I haven't been courting death for 2 days. I shall do it seriously today. At that moment, he had already arrived at a collapsed tower. He sat beside a wall that had only been cut down by half. He reached out to take out a paper crane from the historical void, and he ignited it. He wanted to see if he could contact the Snake of Fate will accept in series if there was a medium. He wanted to know where he could obtain the main ingredients of the Miracle Invoker potion. Under the illumination of his third summoning of the lantern, Klein fell into a deep sleep, but he didn't dream of anything. Indeed, it doesn't work. After he woke up, Klein shook his head and let his body enter a historical void. Following that, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and arrived above the gray fog. Sitting at the seat belonging to the fool, he beckoned for a small paper box from the junk pile. Inside was a stack of paper cranes. These were personally folded by a certain baby. At the same time, the world Gehrman Sparrow was conjured. He prayed to Mr. Fool in a grayish-white region and requested him to forward his request to Miss Justice, saying that this act could allow her to make contributions to her exchange for the manipulator potion formula. Of course, Klein had already revealed that the potion needed to be consumed while amidst a huge emotional resonance. Backlund, Empress Burrow, inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. Audrey returned to her bedroom once again and set up a bestowment ritual to obtain the paper crane. She picked up a thin pencil and wrote on the paper crane's surface, "Dwayne Dantes has requested you to meet with me." After finishing her preparations, Audrey followed Mr. World's instructions and placed the paper crane under her pillow before lying down to sleep. Soon, she saw a pitch-black desolate plain. As a dreamwalker who had given herself hints in advance, she maintained her consciousness and walked towards the black steeple in the middle of the plains with strong curiosity. As soon as she arrived at her destination, Audrey's spiritual perception was triggered. She raised her head and looked at the top of the steeple. At some point in time, there was a giant silver snake coiled there. This gigantic snake didn't have any scales. Its body was covered with symbols and patterns that formed wheels that were connected to each other, with different labels. At that moment, the gigantic snake was staring at Audrey with its bright red and cold eyes. It said in a low voice, "What does Dwayne Dantes want?" "This is the angel of the fate pathway that gave Ma'am Hermit a drop of blood?" Audrey controlled her thoughts and calmly looked at the gigantic snake. She said in honesty, "He wanted me to ask you where he can obtain the main ingredient of the Miracle Invoker potion." The gigantic silver snake suddenly fell silent for a few seconds before saying, "The number of sequence 2s in different pathways differ in numbers. Under the situation of the quota of Attendant of Mysteries being filled, there can only be a total of 6 Miracle Invokers. A Miracle Invoker is the name of a sequence 2 potion. Mr. World is going to become an angel? Or is he making preparations for his partner? No, if it's a companion, he can get them to ask him themselves." Audrey was first alarmed before she began to look forward to the mysterious serpent's answer. Chapter 1178, I Have a Blessed. The gigantic silver snake looked down at Audrey and opened its blood-red mouth. The Sequence 1 potion that Zeradal, the leader of the Secret Order, consumed came from an Attendant of Mysteries. In other words, he possesses an extra Miracle Invoker characteristic. Similarly, it was the same for the ancestor of the Antigonus family back then. Of course, if they were interested in something, or if they had a candidate who had won the favor of the family to the point of them being willing to nurture them, then an angel with sufficiently high status can separate the extra miracle invoker beyonder characteristic to the other party. The third miracle invoker's beyonder characteristic had combined with a characteristic of mysterious origins. It has become sealed artifact 0-05, also known as the magic wishing lamp. A true deity once attempted to destroy this item, to separate the characteristics and allow them to converge automatically, but eventually failed. The fourth and fifth miracle invoker beyonder characteristics are in the form of a grade 0 sealed artifact that exists in the churches of the Eternal Blazing Sun and Lord of Storms. One of them is named 0-13. It comes from the third epic's creator, designated as the Last Banquet. The other is codenamed 0-32, a product of the War of the Four Emperors, designated as theater with curtains that never draw. The sixth miracle invoker beyonder characteristic might be in the Forsaken Land of the Gods. During the third epic, there was a remnant dark demonic wolf who occasionally appeared. After the cataclysm, he vanished without a trace. Audrey listened attentively and thought carefully for a moment before saying, "You're saying that, under the situation where the Attendant of Mysteries spots are filled, there are only 6 miracle invokers. And now, you only mention the Secret Order's leader, Zeradal, and the ancestor of the Antigonus family, but the spots don't seem to be filled. In such a situation, there might be an extra miracle invoker beyonder characteristic." This wasn't information that the World Gehrman Sparrow had informed her of in advance. Instead, it was a question that Audrey had come up with on her own accord from the details of the answer and her knowledge of mysticism. The eyes of the giant silver snake moved slightly. Indeed. There should be 3 attendants of mysteries. But in the second epic, in the era when the ancient god, Phlegria, still lived, the third set of the Attendant of Mysteries beyonder characteristic seemed to have disappeared without a trace. No one knows where it is. Likewise for the corresponding miracle invoker beyonder characteristic. Perhaps it has already combined together and has found a sufficiently concealed method to hide itself. Audrey nodded gently and said, "I understand. I'll pass on the information to Mr. Dwayne Dantes. Oh. He even asked me to ask you if there's anything you need his help with?" The giant silver snake slithered up and a third of its body stood up. "No. A small matter. Yes, I have a blessed who is an outstanding gourmet. He has a desire to taste ice cream from the various noble families, so as to determine the most delicious one. This request, Mr. Snake, maybe it's Ma'am Snake, is really nice to her blessed. His tone is as if he can't wait. This is too simple. I can agree to help on Mr. World's behalf and complete it on my own. I'll just treat it as accumulating the sufficient contributions needed to exchange the potion formula." Audrey said thoughtfully, "No problem. But how do I send him the ice cream?" The giant silver snake slowly coiled and said, "Sacrifice it to him. He's already a sequence 3 saint and can accept sacrifices in the same city. His honorific name is the embodiment of luck, the clairvoyant monster, the calamity that spreads misfortune, the witnesses of all fates in Backlund, the keeper of chaos and madness. There's a difference between this honorific name and a normal sequence 3's. There's no name at the end." Audrey's eyes darted around slightly, but she didn't say anything further and nodded in agreement. Keeper of chaos and madness. Will's last honorific name is quite interesting. This shouldn't be the honorific name of the Snake of Fate, but something that he used when he was at Sequence 3. Some tweaks were made later on. The monster pathways watches over chaos and madness, or could it be said that in this world, even for Fate, those at the lower sequences are in chaos and madness? Monsters are working hard to resist all of this, making everything seem normal. After Klein heard Miss Justice's answer, he didn't find it odd for Will Septon to request for ice cream. Instead, he found the honorific name of the Life School of Thought president rather interesting. Having a blessed. That's like saying I know someone. Did Will learn this from me? No, I have a real blessed, Danitz. Later on, I'll have this fellow sacrifice something for me to eat. I can't really eat those mutated monsters or summon projections from the historical void, right? Yes, if I have a chance, I'll invite little son to try them together. I can't let him be obsessed with Frank's mushrooms. The number of blessed serving definitely won't be less than mine. There might even be more. He has the huge life school of thought. Klein conjured the world Gehrman Sparrow and made him reply to Miss Justice, indicating that the ice cream contributed plenty. After completing all of this, he wrapped the edge of the long model table and seriously considered the problem with the main ingredient of the miracle invoker. There's no need to think about the miracle invoker beyond her characteristic with Zeradol. It's impossible for him to separate it to give it to me. He only wants to turn me into his marionette. It's not like there's zero hope with Antigonus's 2 portions, but if that's the case, I'll have to request it from the goddess again. I can't offer something equivalent. I'm afraid. Besides, the goddess might not be able to provide it. The reason why she wants to seal the half-fool, who has lost control, is probably because she is unable to kill him. Once he is killed, he will be able to escape his current predicament and revive elsewhere, just like how I escaped from Amon. Under such a situation, the goddess has no way of getting Antigonus to separate a miracle invoker beyond her characteristic. Even a true deity can't shatter 0-05, so there's no point targeting it. It's useless even if I have it. This sealed artifact's origins are truly mysterious. There's something very fishy about it. The Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun's 0-13 is called the Last Banquet. It comes from the City of Silver's creator. Why does this person always like to use the names that have dangerous implications? The Church of the Lord of Storms 0-32 is theater with curtains that never draw. Just the sound of it allows me to imagine what it's like. The chances of obtaining these 2 grade 0 sealed artifacts are very low, but it's not impossible. It just depends on whether the Eternal Blazing Sun and Lord of Storms are willing to support my growth so as to contain Amon. Yes. Up to now, they have yet to show any kindness. I can't find a suitable way to interact with the right person. I can't possibly use divination to spy on the Eternal Blazing Sun again and communicate with him through space, right? If that happens, wouldn't it be better if he directly invades Saphira Castle and takes control of this place? If I were to nurture Mr. Hangman and wait till he has the qualifications to come into contact with a grade 0 sealed artifact, I'll most likely have become Amon. The true creator knows a clue to the 3rd characteristic of the Attendant of Mysteries. His divine kingdom and holy residence are in the forsaken land of the gods. These 2 might be related somehow. The 2 sets of miracle invoker characteristics and an Attendant of Mysteries characteristics are highly likely to be in the forsaken land of the gods. I wonder which one is in the noise ruins. Yes, the true creator should only know a clue, and not its exact location. Otherwise, he would have obtained that Attendant of Mysteries beyond her characteristic before the War of the 4 Emperors and effectively increased his subordinate's strength. In other words, the Attendant of Mysteries beyond her characteristic is something even a true deity can't obtain quickly, and it's necessary to search for it. It might not be so easy for Amon to come across it, allowing him to set up a trap. If the danger within the ruins were only recently found, having just been transplanted, it would match this trait. From the looks of it, I still have to make a trip. However, I have to be careful enough. The danger comes from Amon and also from the ruins. I'll do a divination first, then I'll observe and gather intelligence from a distance. I won't enter blindly and will be patient enough. Klein conjured a pen and paper and was about to write the corresponding divination statement when he suddenly thought of something and decided to make another confirmation. He drew a complicated symbol that was a mixture of concealment and mystery prying. He threw it into the crimson star representing the magician. With Gehrman Sparrow's image in tone, he asked her to question a Rhodes. Backlund, East Borough. Fours, who was about to move houses, drew the curtains and lit a candle. She set up a mirror and found Shio to act as a bystander. She then drew the symbol that Mr. World had given her. In the room, the environment gradually turned dark as cold winds stirred, causing the 2 to tremble. The surface of the mirror suddenly rippled, forming ancient dark red faceac text. You have summoned the great erodes. You have to abide by the corresponding rules. You have to answer a question for every question asked. If you lie or refuse to answer, you will be punished. All right, Force, who had been warned, calmly replied. Following that, she asked curiously, where can one obtain the main ingredient of the miracle invoker potion? On the surface of the mirror, dark red words appeared one after another as other lines vanished. They answered the question in detail. It's basically the same as Will's answer. Above the gray fog, through the crimson star representing Miss Magician, Klein watched the specific process and nodded in disappointment. After Force memorized the answer, she said nervously, it's your turn to ask. The dark red words changed and formed a new sentence. Have you had an erotic dream in the past year? Phew. Thankfully, it's still okay. Force heaved a sigh of relief and said, yes. This was human nature. She didn't feel that there was anything to be ashamed of. Following that, she raised the second question. Do you have any suggestions on the matter regarding obtaining the main ingredient of the miracle invoker? Erodes dispersed the dark red text and used silver colors to form new words. The Abraham family still holds the Apprentice Pathways Sequence 2 Planeswalker Potion formula, as well as the corresponding powerful sealed artifacts. A total of 2 of them. The Aurora Order also has 1. This. Klein's eyes lit up as he thought of a new possibility. Is that so? Force frowned slightly and said, it's your turn to ask a question. The silver color on the surface of the mirror faded away as dark red colors formed a sentence. Other than you, who else was the star of your erotic dream? Force gaped as her face flushed red. Chapter 1179, Preparations Both Ways. At that moment, Force felt her cheeks burning as she stiffened. She didn't even dare to turn her head to look at her friend. She realized that she had severely underestimated the bottom line of the magic mirror. After stuttering for a moment, Force recalled Mr. World's reminder and closed her eyes. I choose to accept the punishment. A silvery white bolt of lightning fell from the air in the room, but the moment it appeared, the lightning vanished without a trace like it was a hallucination. The dark red words on the surface of the mirror were dyed silver as they were quickly replaced with new content. The question and answer game will end here today. Goodbye. Without waiting for Force to open her eyes and before Shio could react, the rippling light in the mirror instantly calmed down. The gloom and darkness in the room shattered as they were swallowed by the light of the candle. Wasn't there supposed to be a punishment? Force waited for a few seconds before opening her eyes slightly. She looked at the mirror that had returned to normal and then at Shio, who was watching by the sidelines. Shio pointed at the top of her head and said, there was lightning that smote at you, but it disappeared halfway. Also, the magic mirror had already left. The magic mirror was only joking? That's not right. The warning I received was that the questions would be rather embarrassing, and the punishments would be rather heavy. Could it be that Mr. Fool protected me? Force rubbed her right cheek as she made a guess. Perhaps. Shio nodded in agreement with her friend. Just as Force heaved a sigh of relief and rejoiced, she suddenly realized that Shio was looking at her earnestly. What's the matter? Force's heart skipped a beat. Shio asked thoughtfully, in that erotic dream of yours, who was the main lead? Who would remember such a dream from so long ago? Besides, aren't dreams blurry and unclear? Force forced a smile. Shio tersely acknowledged. If that's the case, why didn't you answer with that just now? I was nervous. I was too nervous. Force glanced at the luggage that she had finished packing and said, it's time for us to move. I miss having a fireplace. As she spoke, she walked towards her luggage. It was only at this moment that she realized that, at times, the outcome was similar whether she answered the magic mirror's question or not. Is this the social death that was mentioned by Gehrman Sparrow? I really want to bury my head into the ground. Force continuously took deep breaths in an attempt to calm her burning face and embarrassed heart. In the ancient palace above the fog, Klein threw the sea god scepter back into the junk pile and scoffed at Rhodes's act. Despite knowing that I was the one who sent someone to summon it, it actually dared to raise such a question. Only when I stopped the punishment did it hurriedly change its attitude and leave in a panic. It sure had fun. However, its answer has given me a new train of thought. I really don't need to restrict myself to the path of a miracle invoker. The second blasphemy slate is most likely from the City of Silver's creator, and is now in the hands of Adam. Although Amon and his brother are mutually staying away from each other's affairs and aren't on especially good terms, they have worked together before. I don't believe that he has never seen that blasphemy slate. If that's the case, he is definitely aware of the Miracle Invoker's ritual and can guess that I'll be bringing the City of Silver out of the forsaken land of the gods. When that happens, he wouldn't even need to put much effort into tracking me. He just needs to wait at the Giant King's court. Yes, I can't go according to the enemy's expectations, especially since this is a god of deceit and the god of mischief. Countless accidents will happen. If it's because of my participation that the City of Silver's thousands of years of hope ends up being destroyed, then it'll be completely contradictory to my original intentions. The problem with a planeswalker is that I might hear Mr. Door's ravings, and will suffer the scrutiny and corruption from the cosmos that's worse than sequenced 2 angels from other pathways. Of course, this isn't completely unacceptable. Also, will I need to pay back the 2 resurrection chances that Saphira Castle gave me? That's still fine since I'll definitely transfer back to being an attendant of mysteries at Sequence 1 because Mr. Door has already blocked off the advancement path of the apprentice pathway. He is at least in control of the uniqueness and 2 sets of Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics, perhaps even all 3. It's not necessary for me to switch to Planeswalker, but I have to make the necessary preparations. When my options increase, even if Amon tries to stop me, the difficulty of burying a trap in advance will increase significantly. Only then can I become an angel while under the pressure of a king of angels. Yes. I'll stay on the fence for now. I'll prepare for the Miracle Invoker advancement while preparing for the Planeswalker advancement. I'll determine which pathway to take based on the actual situation when the time comes. Having come to a decision, Klein felt refreshed. His mind was abnormally active, and he quickly came up with a preliminary plan. I'm not in a hurry to ask Miss Magician's teacher about the Planeswalker potion formula and the corresponding Grade 0 sealed artifact. This will scare the Abraham family, making them suspect that Miss Magician worships some evil god and has joined some terrible organization. With their current situation, there's a high chance that they won't reply. They will change their identities, move, and sever all ties. Yes, the head of the Saint of Secrets, Bodhi's, will make a fine gift. Regardless of whether the Abraham family gives the Worm of Cosmos, this matter will have to be placed on the agenda. I hope Miss Justice can digest the Dreamwalker potion as soon as possible. I hope that Ma'am Hermit will be prepared. I also hope that the 2 ladies, Miss Magician and Miss Judgment, will be able to improve before the operation. Right, according to what Miss Magician said, Saint of Secrets Bodhi's is a defector of the Abraham family, and the Aurora Order holds a Grade 0 sealed artifact of the apprentice pathway. That's interesting. Perhaps I don't need to contact the Abraham family. I might be able to get what I want from the Saint of Secrets. I have to remind Ma'am Hermit that Bodhi's might be carrying a Grade 0 sealed artifact, so confirmation has to be made before the operation. If that Grade 0 sealed artifact isn't in the hands of the Saint of Secrets, then I'll probably have to face the Angel of Fate Ouroboros to get it. No, Grade 0 sealed artifacts are terrifying to begin with. It's one of the sources of danger. Phew, I'll first wait for Miss Magician's teacher to reply and see if the Abraham family is averse to any mention of the Worm of Cosmos. As he thought of this, Klein suddenly felt a hint of self-deprecation. He felt that he and the Aurora Order appeared to be destined enemies. They often had all kinds of interactions. When the operation begins, the Aurora Order will definitely shout in their hearts, "Why is it you again? Why is it us again?" After letting out a breath, he gathered his thoughts and conjured the World Gehrman Sparrow. He replied to Miss Magician who had reported the answer. Following that, the world prayed once again, requesting Mr. Fool to forward his request to Danitz. On a certain island in the fog sea, Danitz, who was waiting for the golden dream, turned his head to look at Anderson and chuckled. "I'm going to summon Gehrman Sparrow's messenger." Anderson pricked up his brows and scoffed. "You're qualified to consume the conspirer potion. You were the one who made it too obvious. Even I could sense that you were afraid of that messenger." Danitz felt even more pleased with himself as he said humbly. Anderson suddenly guffawed. "Why do you not suspect that I'm pretending to be afraid? I'm just trying to find a reasonable excuse to avoid hearing things I shouldn't be hearing." "Dog shit, do you think I'll believe the lies you came up with in a hurry?" Danitz was almost convinced. Anderson spread his hands and walked to the door. "You've gathered all the materials of the conspirer potion. Remember to remind Gehrman to not forget my iron-blooded night potion formula." Danitz waved his hand impatiently, indicating that he hadn't forgotten. After Anderson walked out of the room and closed the door, Danitz immediately set up a ritual and summoned the messenger holding 4 blonde, red-eyed heads. Seeing the 8 eyes look over at the same time, Danitz's chest immediately retracted. He forced a smile and handed out a gold coin. "Ma'am, Gehrman Sparrow wants me to tell you that he's fine. He's now in the forsaken land of the gods." "Wait, what did I say?" The forsaken land of the gods. As a crew member of Vice Admiral Iceberg, Danitz's knowledge of mysticism was still adequate. After a momentary pause, his pupils clearly dilated. "All right." Rionette Tinker bit down on the gold coin and answered immediately. Then, she entered the void and vanished from the room. After reporting this to Gehrman Sparrow, Danitz received the Iron-Blooded Knight's potion formula and new orders. Prepare some local delicacies and sacrifice them to see God Calvetua. Isn't this mission a little odd? Danitz muttered to himself, but he didn't dare to raise any questions. He quickly tidied up the altar, found a parchment, and wrote down the supplementary ingredients and corresponding ritual in the Iron-Blooded Knight potion formula. Following that, he opened the door and handed the parchment to Anderson. Form a team of at least 30 people. The stronger the team's strength and chemistry, the better the ritual's effects. Anderson unfolded the parchment in front of Danitz and read it. As he read, his brows gradually furrowed. If the team's chemistry is to build upon the idea of killing me, the captain, the ritual is rather simple. Without waiting for Danitz to mock him, a burning white flame appeared from his fingertip and burned the parchment. Anderson chuckled. I need to go back to my homeland to find an opportunity. That place is currently being invaded by Phaenopotter, and war is always the best place for building up and training a team. With a pause, he looked at Danitz and said with a smile, I've prepared some questions for you. They're in my room. Once you become a conspirer, you can try doing it and see if your intelligence has improved. Dog shit. Are you trying to trick me into reading all the books in your room? Danitz was almost moved, but he immediately understood that something was wrong. No matter how high his intelligence was, he wouldn't be able to solve the questions if he hadn't read the textbooks. Not bad. It only took you 3 seconds this time to grasp the crux of the matter. If it were in the past, you would have really believed me. Anderson praised with a smile as he turned around and left the inn. Chapter 1180, Different Effects. In the forsaken land of the gods, at night when the frequency of lightning had dropped to a very low frequency. 2 slices of white bread and a piece of barbecued meat is pretty good after all. The sweet and sour desserts from the fog sea are better than I had expected. After swallowing the last mouthful of food, Klein sighed in amazement from the bottom of his heart. He then threw the remaining packaging into the darkness. After all, there was no concept of environmental protection here, nor was there a rubbish bin. Of course, he had removed his connection with those items ahead of time, just like how he would head over to Saphira Castle to perform sterilization every time he abandoned a marionette. This was to prevent Amon's avatars from locking onto him with them. Lifeless objects won't be transferred into a concealed state by the darkness here. Klein raised the lantern that Danitz had sacrificed, and he illuminated the abandoned items. It was only after he filled his stomach that he was in the mood to try out the dangerous things he had previously divined. Amidst the flickering dim yellow light, Klein reached his right hand out into the air and dragged out another projection of himself. It was another version of him from the historical void, one who was also holding onto a lantern. Klein entered the grayish-white fog 1 second later, allowing his projection's consciousness to awaken. The projection was surrounded by a group of monsters. Amidst the endless darkness, it opened its mouth, planning to recite the name, Ammonizes. He didn't manage to make a single sound, as though the words he wanted to say had been concealed. Indeed, it's as I expected. Wearing a silk half-top hat and a black trench coat, Klein slowly took a deep breath. Looking at the lantern that emitted faint yellow light, he suddenly chanted in Jotun, Liataro. Before he could finish his sentence, more than 100 lightning bolts warped as if they were responding to being summoned. They instantly blanketed the area. There was no time for him to dodge. Even if he had switched places with a marionette, he would still be within the attack range. Amidst the brightening of silvery white light, he collapsed to the ground. His body was charred as he convulsed violently, as though he had become a gigantic piece of coal. Then, his figure rapidly dissipated as the illusion vanished. Wearing a real top hat, clothed in an Intis-styled windbreaker and carrying a simple lantern, Klein immediately returned to reality and continued proceeding forward as if nothing had happened. After walking for a while, his figure suddenly turned blurry and clear. Following that, Klein opened his mouth again and read out a name in Jotun, "Oh." Just as he produced the first syllable, a transparent flame burst out from his body, instantly reducing him to ashes, not giving him a chance to switch places with his marionette. Klein's figure appeared once again. He pressed his hat and walked calmly on the hill filled with strange plants. Haraburgen. Badheil. Olmabella. There's nothing out of the ordinary. There are no traces of the corresponding divine powers left in the vicinity of the City of Silver. Medici, Ouroboros, Sasser. These are of no use, neither one of them are deities. I thought that the situation at Afternoon Town and the Giant King's Court was due to special circumstances. Using Sasser's true name outside can activate the powers of degeneration from the forsaken land of the gods. As a king of angels with the uniqueness, Red Angel is also considered half a true god. Yet, there aren't any traces left of him. How shameful for a person, no, shameful for a king of angels. As Klein walked down the hill, he followed his spiritual intuition and headed northwest where the city ruins of Noise were. He would occasionally take a detour, occasionally using Flaming Jump, and he didn't follow the route that the City of Silver had used to explore to reach their destination. Backlund, late at night. Feeling that she had digested the potion a little more, Audrey very eagerly used dream traversal to leave her mansion and to enter the various dreams of the surrounding area. Knowing what the current situation was like, she had a strong desire to become a demigod. Just like that, she suddenly saw someone familiar. This was a noble lady who had a good relationship with her. She was 29 years old and had married a viscount 2 years ago. At this moment, the lady's room was filled with rose petals. The bed was white, and there was a heart-shaped ring placed on it. And she could hear knocking sounds from the outside. With flushed cheeks, the lady quickly walked over and opened the window. A man wearing a black iron mask and a dark cloak leaped in. He hugged the lady and whispered, "I'll take you away from your suffering." Then, the two of them started to wrap their bodies around one another as they rolled into bed. As a dreamwalker who was working hard to digest the potion, Audrey had long seen similar scenes. She had experienced the phase of feeling embarrassed, and she sighed at how everyone's dreams were full of imagination. At that moment, she didn't lose her composure at all. She maintained the etiquette of a spectator, as though she was witnessing an overly intense play. After a brief examination, she discovered a problem. The man wearing the black iron mask wasn't the wife's spouse, but more like a particular playboy in the aristocratic circles. Is this a reflection of what's hidden in her heart? Audrey muttered to herself in an academic manner while analyzing the dream. Following that, she traversed into the dream beside her out of curiosity. This dream corresponded to the noble wife's husband, the Viscount. In the dream, this Viscount was busy attending a discussion at the House of Lords. Later, he was chased by an earl with a revolver. The latter claimed that he had tricked his daughter. After escaping to a safe zone, the Viscount found his female secretary to vent his fear. Audrey couldn't help but leave the dream, wanting to see the state the Viscount and his wife were in. In the bedroom under the illumination of the crimson moonlight, the Viscount was hugging his wife on the huge white bed. His wife was hugging him and sleeping in a very intimate manner. Yes, I have to realize that everyone has a dark side to them. It's just a dream that they've had. If conviction for a mere instantaneous thought was carried out, then everyone would descend into hell, and no one will be spared, including myself. I can control my dark side, preventing it from ever being realized in the real world. To most people, that's already considered excellent. Audrey increasingly felt that acting as a dreamwalker was a way to question and hone one's mind and body. She entered the dreamscape again and traversed to another area. Not long after, she arrived at a warm room. There was a dining table placed over a thick carpet. At the seat of honor was a white-haired old lady. To her sides were a middle-aged couple and 3 children who were not of age. They were all enjoying the delicious food, chatting and laughing. It was dark outside the room. The strong winds made the glass groan and thump as they seemed to brew a horrifying sensation before the disaster struck. What is the owner of this dream bothered about? Audrey retreated from the dream and tried to find an answer from the real world to verify her hypothesis. She then saw a small bed and the white-haired old lady. There were photo frames on the bedside table of the old lady. They were either wrapped in black cloth or white flowers, consisting of a middle-aged couple and 3 underage children. Audrey silently turned her head to look out the window, only to see that there were ruins nearby, ones left behind by an explosion. The young noble lady pursed her lips and suddenly returned to the old lady's dreams. She didn't stop the disaster that might happen. She only conjured a chair and sat on it. She looked at the happy and warm family in a solemn manner. Amidst the howling wind and glass, the room was brightly lit. There was the fragrance of food and laughter everywhere. Audrey had already concluded one of the acting principles of Dreamwalker: a traveler of a dream enters, takes in the sights and records, never interfering. That was a spectator. In St. Samuel Cathedral, having been summoned by Bishop Anthony Stephen, Leonard slowly walked up the spiral staircase under the sunlight that shone in through the stained glass. Suddenly, he said with a suppressed voice, "Old man, that secret gathering is about to begin again. Are you really planning to attempt to enter the treasures left behind by the Jacob family at the end of the month?" "I'm not sure yet, but this is an opportunity. At the very least, Amon's main body is being tied down by the matter regarding Saphira Castle. He won't suddenly appear." In Leonard's mind, Pallas Zoroast replied with a slightly hoarse voice, "However, I'm more inclined to reveal the news of the treasure trove. I want the people at the gathering to adventure and explore it. We'll stay in the vicinity and observe the situation, taking what I need from their hands." Leonard was taken aback as he whispered, "Old man, isn't that too sinister?" This was using the members of the Hermits of Fate as tools to step into a trap. "Heh, naive, childish. You can tell them all the details and let them decide whether they want to go on their own." Pallas scoffed. Leonard didn't mention it again. Instead, he asked, "Old man, when can I become a demigod?" Pallas chuckled. "If you can obtain a spirit at the level of your former colleague's messenger, you'll be able to digest the potion by the beginning of next year. However, it's better to act according to my instructions. Engage in a deeper level of acting. Wait till the second half of next year, you'll have the qualifications to try for Sequence 4. Of course, I'm not sure if the Church of Evernight will give you the potion and hold a ritual for you." That high-ranking deacon named Casimir Crestet had to wait several years before he truly became a demigod when war truly broke out, didn't he? Leonard nodded and asked thoughtfully, "Old man, can you act as a spirit to help me digest the potion? Your level should be higher than Klein's messenger." Pallas Zoroast fell silent for a few seconds before he chortled. "What a great idea. How about I help you digest the potion? How? Leonard knew that old man was mocking him, but he couldn't help but ask. I'll deeply parasitize you, gaining full control over your body, Pallas snapped back. As he spoke, Leonard came to the door of the Backlund diocese's archbishop. He immediately shut his mouth and raised his right hand to knock on the door. Come in. Anthony Stephen glanced at Leonard, who had opened the door. You can release that vampire behind Channy's gate.